Morning, Madam Mayor.
Good morning. We are live now. Good morning to everyone. Hope everyone had a great long weekend. Didn't eat too much turkey. We have a special meeting today of our council for Wednesday, October 14th, 2020, and it's a workshop style. So with that, I will call the meeting to order and ask if there's any declarations of interest at this time. Seeing none, I will move to deputations. I do not have any deputations listed at this time. And we'll move to item D, which is our workshop. And with that, I will turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll kick today off. And workshops have been traditionally, through the last several years of, at least in EG, they've been used as a manner which council and the public can see some very complicated topics that and allow for some good discussion, education, and understanding of where we are. And we're pretty fortunate in East Gwillimbury. We've always had an economic development function that was maybe somewhat a little understated. And we hired Margot Bajin about a year ago now, and she brought in some excellent private sector experience, and she's really helped bring a new energy and focus to our East Gwillimbury's economic development initiatives. She's worked closely with council and our various advisory committees. And we're really glad that she's able to lead this workshop today. And she even has a doctor involved that did some research for us that we look forward to hearing from as well. So I just ask Mr. Valchich if he wanted to provide a little context, and then we'll get into Margot's presentation and discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom, and good morning, Madam Mayor and members of council and members of the public. Really pleased to be able to be facilitating this workshop today. And just to build a little bit on what the CAO said, Margot has really brought an elevated level of kind of strategic focus for us. And I just want to remind members of council that today is an opportunity for dialogue. There's going to be a lot of information shared with you, but we look forward to the conversation. We look forward to having the questions, the suggestions, any concerns and so on shared, because this is part of a process. And by the way, this is not the beginning of the process. Margot has been working very hard behind the scenes with our Economic Development Advisory Committee, been actively engaged. We've had some subject matter expertise you're going to hear from today with regard to target market and our market analysis that positions us well. And I know Margot has engaged one of the members of the Economic Development Advisory Committee and has taken time to meet with every member of council just to go through a little bit of an understanding of what you perceive to be strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that we face as we move towards an objective of increased job creation in East Gwillimbury. So this is part of the process today. It's not the beginning, it's not the end, but it is an important part, and we really look forward to it. And with that, Madam Mayor, I'll turn it over to Margot Bajin.
Thank you.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to hold this workshop and to provide an update on Advantage EG and the economic development strategy that will define our Advantage EG approach going forward. Just to echo what Mark said, this morning's presentation is a result of observations over the past year, as well as extensive consultation with yourselves as members of council and the senior management team, members of the Economic Development Advisory Committee. And in preparation for our discussion this morning, I had an opportunity to meet with each of you to discuss our collective strengths, the existing barriers or weaknesses that we need to address, our strongest opportunities for growth, and the conditions or threats to that growth that we need to be mindful of as we move forward. I was fortunate, as Mark mentioned, to have the assistance of one of our EDAC volunteers, George Shriver, for those SWOT conversations, and appreciated and benefited from his input as both an experienced economic development consultant and a longtime resident of East Gwillimbury. You'll also, as Mark mentioned, have an opportunity to hear from Dr. Nadine Jesrich, who is an economist who assisted in preparing the analysis of our target sectors and helped to identify future opportunities this past summer. During the workshop, I'm hopeful that it will, as Tom said, it will be less of a presentation and more of an interactive discussion that will guide the development of our updated strategy and help to inform the priorities, the objectives, the tactics that we undertake in working toward our economic development goals. And with your indulgence, Madam Mayor, I'd like to invite members of senior staff to participate in the discussion as well. Economic development, as we know, cannot progress in isolation from the planning, engineering, recreation and culture, financial management functions. So it's important to consider those perspectives as we define our strategic priorities and consider our approaches to driving sustainable economic growth. If we could move to the next slide, please. We're going to ground our discussion this morning in very quick overview, sort of to provide a foundational understanding of the current economic development context in East Gwillimbury. I think it'll be helpful to have an understanding of where we're starting from. We'll also spend some time exploring the various economic development tactics that are available to us and look at how those tactics can support our development and job growth goals. I'll then turn things over to Nadine Jesrich to review and discuss the target industry snapshot findings. We'll then spend some time on the SWOT analysis and the key themes that emerge from those discussions. And then we'll dive into the key enablers of development, which are essentially those make or break elements that will influence our ability to support sustainable business growth and to attract investment. And finally, we'll talk about the emerging strategic themes. These themes will not only drive our updated strategy, but it will also demonstrate what I think is a really exciting shift from where we were or where we're starting our discussion today to where we want to go and how we plan to get there. Now, just one caveat is I tend to get very excited about this stuff and would happily talk strategy all day. So I would ask that please stop me at any point if you have a question or if you want to make a comment, share your thoughts, or just need a stretch break. So we can go to the next slide, please. So in order to start the discussion, I wanted to go back to our existing economic development strategy and I look at the vision that was identified as part of that process. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether or not this is still a good representation of our vision for economic development, or if this is something, and we don't necessarily need to take time to do it today, but is this something that we need to perhaps slightly tweak and update, or is this a vision that we need to completely rework? And I'll, if anybody has any thoughts and wants to jump in right now, whether or not this vision still resonates, or we can think about it as we go through and come back to it at the end of the discussion. So seeing no comments, I'll just go on to the next slide, please. I think it's also important to understand what we mean when we talk about economic development, in that it's programs, activities, policies that are all focused on enhancing the economic well-being and the quality of life for the community that it serves. And we do that by creating or retaining existing jobs and facilitating growth that then contributes to a stable tax base. And that tax base is what helps to support the amenities and attributes that the community values. Next slide. These were the high-level goals that were identified as part of the strategy that's now almost 10 years old. And we'll come back to these at the end, but I thought it was useful to sort of to provide a sort of starting point and see where we get to at the end of our discussion. But a lot of this was about fostering and advocacy and supporting economic development efforts. So creating a town or community that is livable and sustainable, which certainly aligns with our complete community objectives, advocating and supporting collaborative regional economic development, and that's manifested in a renewed collaboration with the N6 partners and with our regional partners, especially through this challenging pandemic, and to support the expansion of business investment opportunities in the town's urban and rural areas. So I think that's it's a good sort of snapshot of our high-level economic development goals. Next slide, please. And as part of those discussions and part of the sort of the the evolution of our economic development strategy, we've identified job creation as our primary economic development objective. And we know that by 2051, based on the growth projections that have been supported by provincial data, that we're going to be approximately 150,000 people, and we would like to be in a position of having one job for every 2 residents. And that excuse me, and these growth projections help to inform all aspects of our municipal planning in terms of all our service delivery, financial planning, and how we plan to support economic growth. Next slide, please. I also wanted to take a little time to talk about why business growth matters and why we care about economic development at all. And I think this helps to explain how the various impacts of economic development connect to creating a sustainable community. So economic diversification and resiliency, that speaks to the idea that we're not a one industry community, that the inevitable fluctuations and challenges that emerge, if we have enough different types of industries and different types of businesses, we can withstand those fluctuations and those shocks. And we're seeing that through the pandemic, where a number of members of our business community are really struggling because of the restrictions that the pandemic has imposed. But in other areas, businesses are doing quite well, and some businesses have managed to sort of maintain a steady state, have been able to adapt their operations to the constraints of the pandemic and been able to move along. And that helps to support resiliency, so that the pandemic hasn't completely shut us down. There has been serious impacts, but we have other areas that are doing well. I think we all understand that job creation benefits us in direct and indirect ways. When a new business moves to East Gwillimbury, they'll create jobs, but then there are other jobs that get created in terms of suppliers or service providers to that business. So there's an indirect benefit to that job creation objective as well. Obviously, tax revenue, they're contributors to the tax base, which is what allows us to have and maintain the amenities that we offer. The development charges directly contribute to that. Capital investment, which is an injection into the community for the actual development project itself. So the construction, all of the things that go into building and developing a site for a business to be able to locate, which then manifests in site improvements because they work with our parks team, for example, to ensure that there is landscaping and that there are perhaps entrance features. And so that helps to contribute to our overall objectives in terms of how we want the community to look and feel. It supports infrastructure development, because we know that when we have that critical mass of development, that's what helps to catalyze having the addition of services provided and to be able to extend servicing. And it also, it's important that we remember that this contributes to our salaries, that this is who we work for. We work for our residents, we work for our business community, and I think it's important that we remain mindful of that, and that these are our customers, these are our clients, and we need to think about that in our daily interactions. And then if we keep moving, we get the benefit of the corporate presence in our community, that as engaged corporate citizens, we benefit from volunteerism, we benefit from their leadership in community groups, and we also see the benefit translate into sponsorship of facilities or programs in our community and sports programming, that kind of thing. So there is a real sort of life cycle of the investment that is more profound and has more impact than just the initial job creation itself. And I think this kind of is why we do it and why we care about our businesses growing and being able to attract new investment. Next slide, please. I wanted to spend a little time as well talking about job growth as a contributor to our concept of complete communities. And when we talk about because the question comes up, why are we focused on job growth? When we attract a new business here, it's not necessarily a given that all of the jobs will be held by residents of East Gwillimbury, for example. But over time, and working with our education providers and working to ensure that the workforce skills that we try to attract are a match for our employers, more and more people from East Gwillimbury, the hope is, would transition into being able to work where they live and live where they work, and be able to avail themselves of these opportunities, and or grow the opportunities that already exist to be able to employ more people. So so job growth is both benefits in a sort of a direct economic sense, but also benefits in a community sense, in that when people aren't commuting out and spending hours on the road, they're more engaged in the community. There's less traffic, there's less pollution, all of those benefits that come from having a complete community where people can participate in the economy, where they can participate in community life, and where they can contribute to leadership and governance and all of the things that make for a strong, resilient community. Next slide, please. And when we talk about jobs, I think it's important to talk about what we mean by jobs. The types of jobs that we're trying to attract offer competitive or living wages that allow the individuals to be able to support themselves or their families. These jobs offer opportunities for advancement. They offer opportunities for training and professional development. They are safe, they're secure, they come with benefits. These are the kinds of jobs we're talking about. And these quality jobs are not necessarily limited to white collar professions. They and I think it speaks to this idea of wanting to maintain economic diversity. We need to be able to attract jobs at all skill levels, as long as they are these kind of quality jobs that allow people to participate in the community, to participate in the economy, to support themselves and their families. Next slide, please. So we have a number of tactics available to us to achieve this. And I'll maybe pause before I go into this just to see if there are any questions or comments before continuing on. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so we'll move to the next slide, please. So essentially, there are four kind of main headers or tactics that we can use to attract jobs, to attract investment, to support job creation. That's expansion of our existing businesses, economic gardening, entrepreneurship development, and investment attraction. If we go to the next slide, I'll dive into those a little more deeply. We know that upwards of 80% of all new job growth comes from our existing businesses. We talk a lot about trying to attract new development, but it's important to remember that our strategy needs to recognize that there's a significant opportunity for job growth that already exists in our existing business community. The ways that we can support that are through learning and capacity building opportunities, through partnerships with our existing partner resources, such as, for example, South Lake Community Futures, or the Chamber of Commerce, who offers a lot of skill building and learning opportunities for business, through partnering with organizations like Digital Main Street, who can help businesses to expand their online presence and to be able to be more resilient in terms of challenges like the pandemic, working on export development, helping businesses to increase their market, supporting their access to capital so that they can grow, and building their basic business skills. As part of business expansion, you need to have a really active business visitation program, and that's both essential, but it's also resource intensive. And we've had an opportunity to have outreach through the pandemic. We recently conducted a business walk, but it needs to be an ongoing program in order to be able to really support the growth of our existing businesses. Economic gardening, and I think Nadine will touch on this a little bit when she talks about some of the skill sets that she uncovered in her analysis. But it's the idea that we have micro businesses that are here, or we have skilled professionals that are maybe living here but working for a company outside of either outside of York Region or outside of East Gwillimbury, and there's an opportunity to identify those folks and find out, are there ways that we can help them to transition from their micro businesses in their home to grow those businesses to where they may need a storefront location and be hiring additional people and thereby creating jobs. Next slide, please. Entrepreneurship development is typically, something we haven't gotten too directly involved in, but I think it's something that we need to have on our radar, leveraging programs such as those offered by the York Region Small Business Enterprise Center to foster a culture of enterprise or entrepreneurship, and what we can do to ensure that that the business ideas are able to grow and to, again, contribute to job creation. And then finally, investment attraction. And this is kind of what most people think of when they think of economic development in terms of attracting development into the region, and it's certainly a critical piece. In that process, you need to identify targets that match our existing strengths. It has to, when I used to work in the investment attraction field, it was always about what problem does this community solve for your business. So identifying what our value proposition is and what we have to offer in a very specific and niche way is going to be critical to being able to have conversations with prospective investors. And then our ability to differentiate on the basis of excellent customer service is going to be key. I've had the opportunity over the years to talk to CEOs and other C-suite level executives, and I'm sure Nadine can also confirm this, and that a lot of decisions, I mean, the numbers have to work, but a lot of location decisions are made when a company decides to expand into a new community based on relationships, based on the level of business friendliness, based on the responsiveness of the community, and it can make the difference between multi-million-dollar investments coming to your community or not. So I can't overstate how important the idea of business advantage, customer service excellence across the municipality, and how important that is. Next slide, please. I'm now going to turn it over to Nadine to talk a little bit about the research that she undertook on our behalf, because I think that when we're embarking in investment attraction, we need to do it based on good, solid data. We need to understand specifically what problem does East Gwillimbury solve for the businesses we're trying to attract, and we do that by understanding who's already here, what sectors are doing well, where there are supply chain opportunities, what our workforce strengths are, what our educational partners are able to do in terms of supporting a talent pipeline. All of that stuff goes into having a very focused approach to investment attraction, as opposed to, gone are the days of sending out brochures and hoping something sticks. We need to identify specific companies that we know have an opportunity to grow and are most likely to do well here. So next slide, please. The Target Industry Snapshot report looked at a number of pieces of information in terms of conducting this analysis. It looked at our existing strengths, what our value proposition is in terms of what is it that we have to offer, what are we good at, what are we growing in, those types of things. What does our workforce look like? What are our education and training opportunities that can support a company to continually attract the talent that it needs? And it also looked at what sectors are growing, both locally but also internationally, because that will tell us a lot about where our opportunities are for future development and export. And it also considered the impacts of COVID-19, because that has certainly changed the way a lot of businesses operate, but it has created both negative outcomes and some new opportunities. Next slide. So just to tell you a little bit about Dr. Jesrich, she's an economist who essentially understands how economies function and has a lot of expertise in identifying both why companies grow, how they grow, and how communities are best able to attract and position themselves to attract and support those growing companies. So without further ado, I will, unless there are any questions, I will turn it over to Nadine to take us through the target industry snapshot. The next slide, please.
Yeah, thank you, Margot. Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here and walk you through, what often are very dry documents that lie on somebody's desk. So I think it's always helpful to kind of, go through the way it was approached and our thinking and how we came to the conclusions rather than, dropping some piece of paper in front of you. So really, as of course, we didn't try to reinvent the wheel. We started with all the documents that were already created over the last years for your community in terms of strategies, any data that was collected, to really see what the groundwork was that had been done. Our next step is then also always to review what your industry strengths are, as Margot mentioned, in terms of your job counts, in terms of the number of businesses that are there. It also turned out to be quite crucial to understand the sizes of businesses that are active in your region for each of the sectors, to understand kind of the fabric of each of these industries a bit better. And then also make sure that we understand, because of course of commuting patterns, what is going on in nearby economic regions. We always say, when somebody asks us to do an industry study, there's your community, obviously, where your decisions happen, but your economic region could be far greater. So we certainly looked towards Newmarket. We looked to the wider region. We looked at what is going on in the York region, and tried to look at it both from an industry and a workforce perspective. And then, these days, of course, the last couple of years, more so than ever, the question about skilled workforce availability brings always the importance of educational programs to the forefront. So we certainly wanted to see what the supply of new workers in the region looked like as well. We then basically asked, what can we build out of the key sectors? The idea is not to come up with some completely new industry that there's no experience in. That is a very hard story to tell and to sell. And again, this is not making the most out of the resources you have. So it's really starting out with what you have to build on. What are your biggest sectors, whether they're declining or growing, and what can you make out of them? And, are there any areas that have been neglected because they're kind of under the radar, again, because there might be because of the size of businesses that have not been paid as much attention to. The next step after looking at the regional and local economic assets is to put it in the wider perspective. There's your world, and then there's what is driving York, what is driving the province, what is driving Canada, what is happening in the US, because of course trade linkages are an important driver for a lot of industries. So making sure that it aligns with some of the growth trends, both domestically in North America and internationally, is an important way of prioritizing certain areas and highlighting some niche opportunities as well. Last but not least, certainly we looked at the impact of the pandemic this year. It of course, across the board has affected economies. It has certainly affected, of course, retail and the automotive and aerospace sector, more so than a lot of in hospitality, of course, a lot more than other sectors. But it has also, in some areas, created some opportunities. Some things that were accelerated because of the pandemic, they were kind of on the back burner, and people didn't really invest the time or resources, couldn't or wouldn't. But now we're forced to really accelerate these ideas. I'm thinking, for example, in terms of automation. And I always say, even though it helps looking at this in terms of this year and next year, what industries are going to be struggling more than others, the idea of this project was not to just look at the short term, not to look at what you can do this year or next year. It's really about what are the building blocks. So even though, of course, it's important to understand the impact of the pandemic, it really is more about affecting the timeline of things, when industries are going to recover, which industries are going to recover less, certainly as well, and which ones have been even accelerated during this year. But it really spreads out more in terms of when we can see recoveries and some of the restructuring, rather than saying there's certain industries that are just completely crossed off the board because of this year, at least not in your case. And then we put all these pieces of the puzzle together: your assets, the regional, international trends, the impact of the pandemic, and figure out what the best fit is, and see what the best opportunities are. And that's where kind of we started our overall approach with. Next slide, please. So just to summarize, so we looked at who you are, what are you good at right now, and where do you have opportunities for growth. Those are really the three angles that we try to get, and answer questions that we try to answer with this target industry snapshot. Next slide, please. So first, as I said, you look at what are your key sectors, what you have to work with. Farming, of course, still accounts for a very large share of businesses in the locations, business locations in your region. So what, we know that there's not currently much food processing going on, but what else can be made out of this substantial local asset? We know that, again, also construction and trucking, those are, together with agriculture, three of the biggest sectors and employers in your region. And trucking has seen also really fast growth up to this year. And that's basically gives us ideas and a baseline for seeing, okay, what subsectors might be of interest, once we pitch it against other opportunities, what specific elements of these sectors can be moved forward, given your assets and given where you're located. Professional services is something that was interesting. It popped up. It falls more under the category of being under the radar. We saw a large number of, the typical sales and administration jobs, manufacturing managers, and several categories that showed strong growth. And we also saw a very large number of micro businesses, meaning 1 to 4 employees, and self-employed in computer systems design and related services. So that's something that stood out as where, even Margot has obviously spent a lot of time analyzing the region and spending a lot of time understanding it, said, well, I wasn't quite aware that was anything here. And again, these are often companies that they're registered in your area, and that might be under the profile, they might have a website, but they're often just doing their consulting work outside your community, but the skills are there. And I come back to that as well on the workforce side. And then, of course, is your manufacturing sector, which is still small in terms of your job share, but it's very diverse. Whether it's on the furniture side or some of the concrete and other smaller manufacturing and fabrication. So there's a lot of smaller elements to work with, and those are then pitched against what the workforce assets look like. Next slide, please. So the idea is here to, industry classifications are always a bit constraining, meaning, putting something in a certain NAICS code and saying this is, concrete manufacturing, this is furniture manufacturing, this is metal fabrication, still doesn't tell you exactly what the kind of workers are that you have to, that you could build maybe additional industries with, or maybe move into the supply chain with. So we looked at the workforce assets, the occupations in your region, and again, also the wider region, and tried to see what really stood out from that analysis. So we saw an above average concentration of jobs in agriculture, of course, and transportation and material handling and processing. So those are clearly obviously related to your key sectors in agriculture and trucking and construction. We saw a high concentration of trucking and automotive technicians and shippers and assemblers. And for me, assemblers is always, the same as material handling and processing. For me, that always kind of raises a flag in a good sense. And having these skilled traits is something that across the board has been very important over the last years to foster and to develop. And that also goes when you come into the construction sector. You have the mechanics, you have an asset of furniture assemblers. These skilled traits are something that regions can really build upon, both in terms of selling their regions, in terms of their workforce assets, and using those to accelerate more advanced and higher wage jobs, especially now with the drive for automation. So whether it's the machining jobs and in terms of the computer controlled machining and some of the more advanced automation technologies, eventually that are on the docket for pretty much all companies down the road. Then besides the skill traits, I mentioned before the professional and technical services, we've seen a high and growing share of information systems analysts. So the kind of analysts that network different information systems together, that, for example, even relates to cybersecurity and computer networking. And we have also seen a growing share of computer programmers and also interactive media developers and graphic designers. So this is going a little bit more towards the creative sector that has been surely doing really well in a lot of areas in Ontario and not so much yet in York. If people seeing media developers, they often think about video gaming, or they're thinking about film production and motion pictures. It's not something that has been that prominent in the York region. But at the same time, there's a lot of small businesses that have kind of popped up and using a lot of the local resources to do unique, video marketing services and similar interactive digital media services. And that's something that in general in Canada and the US has been doing really well. But this, that falls more into some of those grow your own and the economic gardening that Margot talked about. So some of these industries that are more established, that are driven already by medium-sized companies, lend themselves more towards you grow these companies, you bring in supply chain opportunities where there's enough local demand in the wider region, and you can talk about business attraction, whereas other opportunities are really more about growing and supporting the development of your homegrown businesses. And this is certainly more within that category. Next slide, please. So then, as I said, the pieces of the puzzle, we tried to put them together and see where is the overlap. So for us, what really stood out were the construction products and services. So we're talking about architectural and engineering services. There's a strong workforce asset in your region, and obviously the general expertise and skills in the construction sector as well as in design. We also think there could be an opportunity in advanced concrete manufacturing, such as smart concrete, and these are smaller niche opportunities, but they're growing really well. And the construction sector overall, I think some predictions say it will take until next year to accelerate again. I mean, we're seeing here in the US that residential construction has been going through the roof. If you'd call up any home builder and construction company at the moment, they're booked out until next year. There's certainly differences between countries depending on some of the policies and interest rates and so on. But there certainly has been less of a slowdown than really I think was expected. There's also a lot of backlog where things have been put on hold, and depending again on the policy, some of the more affordable housing has kind of continued fairly well throughout this year, and this will all certainly be picking up again. And then there's always has been a very strong drive by the Canadian government in general for supporting green buildings, and that relates also to prefabricated buildings, that there has been a rising demand. That's really kind of a long-term trend that won't go away. So we're talking also smart technologies, more, I guess, advanced buildings rather than green buildings already sounds so limiting. So this is really more about smart and advanced building technologies and materials. And those sectors have been doing well for a while, whether it's the automated heating ventilation equipment or advanced structural metals. In some areas, the wood buildings have taken off a lot. And in terms of cross-laminated timber as a new construction material. So there's certainly a lot of opportunities. It comes and goes in the construction sector, certainly with GDP to some extent, and with household incomes going up and down. But given your current assets, I think there's a strong story to be told of advancing that sector further. The food processing and supply chain, you certainly have a strong sector within Ontario when it comes to food processing. We have seen that a lot of the subsectors during this year have really fared very well, certainly in terms of packaged food and snack food, unfortunately. And there's a lot of niche food products which over the last couple of years have taken off, especially when it comes to more dietary or health considerations. And those are more, again, smaller companies often that don't necessarily need a large market. They need good logistics and they need the proximity to major metro areas, but they don't necessarily need to sit in an expensive metro downtown area, certainly not these days. And there's also opportunities and continues to be opportunities in the supply chain when it comes to packaging. Certainly now that's accelerated during the pandemic with e-commerce and shipping of food products going through the roof. The advancements of more innovative packaging, more food safe packaging, more traceability. So there's a lot of, again, some at the advanced side, smaller innovative companies, but as well as some of the typical packaging, especially flexible packaging that has been really taking off. The last target sector that we highlighted is an industrial supply, wholesale and distribution. So that really relates back to both your logistics assets and trucking assets, as well as your base of skilled trades. So we're talking about the wholesale and distribution of supplies and equipment for the industrial sector. And that is something that, again, has been doing well, is something that is accelerating from a sense that people are kind of, and Amazon has been trying to get into that sector. They're looking for, again, a lot of access to these kind of warehouses and wholesalers much closer to their base. They want, just like Amazon delivering our packages the next day, more and more companies are expecting to get their supplies delivered on really short notice as well. And that has really driven some of the demand for these industrial supply distributors, not just this year, but over the last couple of years. So we think there's a potential opportunity, of course, depending on land availability across your region as well. So those three areas of construction, products and services, and food processing and industrial supply wholesale, we saw as kind of the three most promising areas to invest resources in, really. We always say these are not a set in stone. As all things, just like this meeting today, it's a process. There are certain things that right now will work better than others, given your current resources, given your infrastructure, and some that have to see more investment. But these, I think, are the most promising starting points. Next slide, please. Then we were also asked to look into future opportunities, a bit more visionary, looking at down the line that could provide opportunities with a certain amount of investment. And I think somebody had raised their hand and wanted to ask a question. Tara?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Dr. Jesrich. I was curious if we could go back to the last slide where you sort of highlighted the three sort of sectors that were opportunities for the short term. I was curious about the industrial supply, wholesale and distribution, sort of the logistics sector. It's my understanding, and perhaps someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but logistics as a sector, are they not more appropriately located close to a port or to an airport or even to a robust rail network? I know we have rail, but we don't really have some of that sort of deeper transportation network that might be required. But perhaps I'm mistaken in what you mean by that sector.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you for your question. No, this is a little bit of a that's the problem sometimes with the naming of industries. It doesn't really help you understand what they actually imply. So, we're talking in terms of industrial supply of the kind of companies that they buy materials from hundreds of suppliers, either manufacturers directly or other wholesalers. You have very large distributors, so they could be carrying a million different items. And for them, certainly, they need the space, but they don't need rail. So we're not talking about machinery. We're not talking about large-scale products like that. So that would be basically a separate category of machinery wholesalers, that fall, and those might need rail. But even that has changed because a lot of them nowadays have very odd sizing that doesn't really fit neatly into rail. So they have opted a lot for trucking as well, specialized trucking for that matter as well. And I think they're looking for space, certainly. In our experience, what we've heard compared to some other opportunities when it comes to looking, I think there's, we understood there to be a little bit of restrictions in terms of buyable land versus leasable land in your area, that they are, because they mainly need a warehouse. They don't need custom buildings. They don't need something, very specific to their unique business activity. That they might, relatively speaking, be more likely to look for leasable space or be okay with it and be able to be convinced that is all they need right now, as long as there's some opportunities to certainly expand. So one example, again to make it a bit clearer what kind of companies we're talking about that we had mentioned in the report. In Markham, you have Alpha Term. So they're a major importer and exporter and distributor of corrosion and abrasion resistant materials, refractory materials. They've been doing that since the 80s. So those kind of specific retailers maybe also not necessarily try to cater to everybody and need 100 or 200,000 square foot warehouse, but that specialize in certain subcategories. And that are totally fine with trucking and just having good highway access. Those are the kind of companies we see that could work in your area.
So you're thinking more sort of, I think of it as when I see logistics, I think of sort of large scale freight forwarding, and what you're thinking is more just a distribution center for specialized materials.
Exactly, or a wholesaler, yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we can, yeah, exactly, thank you. So in terms of future opportunities, so really what we've been trying to do there is look at, first of all, of course, again, connecting it to your current assets. So a lot of people say, oh, why can't we be the next life science hub? Why can't we be the next data center hub or cybersecurity hub? It has to be related to something that, your story. Something that can make you stand apart and that you have skills and assets or educational programs that you can build upon. And, some of those, I think, are also been driven again, actually by the pandemic. So we're talking a lot about automation, and that certainly relates to connected logistics. So, some people call it logistics IT or smart logistics. We're talking tracking devices for the trucking sector, and down the road we can see, maybe piloting some of those programs with smaller companies, with your current trucking companies. And these are certainly all more emerging technologies and emerging companies. So we're really much more looking here at smaller startups or smaller companies that still can be also not just homegrown, but also can be brought in to supplement your ecosystem. And again, connect to your logistics sector, to your construction sector. Smart building and construction technology was something, even when I wrote a report last year, that was very sluggish. It was needed, but was sluggish because there's regulations. The construction sector historically has been one of the slowest ones to adopt any new technology. that's just the way it is. And maybe it is part because of, the regulations they have to go through. At one regional client said, it would be great to have green buildings and smart buildings, but our current regulations, they wouldn't even let us do it. So there's no point for us doing it because we're located here. We have enough regular business. So let's stick with that. And if they ever change the policies, we might be able to get into it. Fortunately, Canada was a US client. Canada is more advanced in a lot of these areas. And so, hopefully on a smaller scale, this relates, for example, to HVAC automation, or even tracking technology and energy efficiency and a lot of these green technologies, that there could be some opportunities for smaller businesses to connect to your construction sector. Agri-tech, so again, technology for the agriculture and farming sector, that has been something that really has been taken off for the last couple of years. It used to be really very small and emerging companies, say even 5 years ago, and then it kind of has started to take off where they reached the maturity in terms of technologies and application and people being willing to adopt it, that these companies have become now more established. We're talking again from, whether it's GPS systems, software for analysis of soil, or for equipment tracking and analysis, and as well as, things that have been driven across Canada for automation to increase the yield on their fields. And as well as the traceability of products that has become, especially during the pandemic, so important, that being able to have software and technology and electronics that can help with that is something that could be looked into. The clean tech is it's a very generic catch-all phrase always. There's certainly a lot of drive everywhere across the board, a lot of new commercialization opportunities and funding available in Canada. But there's always the step going from an idea to actually bringing it to market has always been a bit tricky. We have success stories usually hinging on the communities and regions really supporting across the board, across their community, these kind of technologies, and helping companies pilot projects and helping them get ready for a scale up. So, you have larger metro areas that have kind of carved out some subsectors for within a clean tech and that have made it, to an international scale. But there's also have been smaller regions that have supported initiatives and local startups to grow services and technologies. And whether it's in combination with just a community or the utility companies, or if it's a port authority, finding these opportunities again related to your assets and your local story is really what matters most. So in your case, you of course had the Upper York Sewage Solution project that had been postponed, and the discussions around there. So there was an interest on the water side, water technology, and that's certainly a sector that's very strong in Ontario, when we're talking about over 900 companies and over 300 kind of early stage companies that are investigating water technologies. And you have incubators, you have Canadian research chairs. So there's a lot of activity in there. And I think there is, there's some opportunities there. There's a collaboration between the University of Toronto Scarborough and the Centennial College to set up a training center focused on the development of clean technologies. And I think the mix of talent in East Gwillimbury with IT and engineering, and there's a pipeline of talent, could go support some of these developments. Again, if it's part of a wider community effort and environmental kind of initiative, that's kind of, it really always has to be part of that. There's no community that just attracts or grows clean tech companies and they just work in isolation, and the rest of the community is not fully supporting of adopting themselves all these technologies. So it's a very interesting sector. There's certainly a lot of opportunities, but it requires, I think, a lot of groundwork. And I think that goes for a lot of these opportunities in the technology sector. There's a lot of foundation work that has to be done. entrepreneurship support. And Margot mentioned earlier some of the opportunities to work with different assets in the region, the funding they need, to have municipal pilot programs and to have a really strong stakeholder buy-in and collaboration between the existing companies and new startups and tech companies and consultants and those people that are, both understand the technologies, but also the market aspect of new products and how to actually turn it into a business activity. The last opportunity we mentioned as a kind of down the road visionary possibility to be kind of kept in the forefront, is certainly on your forefront is the healthcare. And so there, we looked at, of course, some of the activity of tech innovation and the accelerator programs in the wider region. So you have at the South Lake Regional Health Center activities, you have the Venture Lab Health Ecosphere, and you have some really world-class regional hospitals there, including the Mackenzie Health Smart Hospital that I don't know if they actually ended up opening. They were supposed to be opening this year. I don't know if that was delayed. So there's a lot of activity that's driven by the population growth and the aging population in the York region. Now, investments in primary healthcare, of course, very much depend on the institutions that follow this population growth and to what extent, there are innovative healthcare systems such as South Lake Hospital. So it seems there's certainly potential and proximity to enough customers to invest in the expansion of these healthcare services. And, given the regional rural communities, there's also, I think, potential opportunities, especially again, driven by the pandemic and telehealth and health IT, that, for example, within the Seneca campus offerings could provide technology opportunities for East Gwillimbury as well. Again, these are entry-level technologies, so they need strong partnerships with the healthcare institutions and local providers, of course. And I think next slide, I don't know if that was a wrap-up slide, potentially. I think I'm handing it back there to, and I mentioned some of this, to Margot after this. So again, I was mentioning and linking it back to some of her tactics and foundations for supporting the smaller tech companies to support economic gardening, especially when it comes to turning some of these hidden computer programmers and information systems consultants that are in these micro business and turning them into opportunities and then assets for the region and helping them to connect and build something out of that. So I think maybe the next slide. And Margot, I think, there you go. I'll hand it back to Margot. So, of course, if there's any questions before we move on, please feel free.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, but maybe before you depart, Nadine, and thank you very much for that. Just could you talk a little bit about, telling your story and how that translates to a value proposition and what that means in terms of sort of practical tactics and sort of distill what you've done into how it manifests in our marketing, for example.
Yeah, I think my approach is always, in the end, you have to fit your story on a page. So think of it, if you needed a cheat sheet of a one-pager where you have a couple of minutes to pitch your case, whether you sell a product or a region, it really comes down to, you need to understand the industry. So you need to have, the bullet points ready. Okay, what is driving this industry? What is driving it right now and what has changed? What are the key challenges? You need to be aware of what's driving it. And then you need to be able to sell yourself. So what is your key value proposition? What are your key workforce assets? How many companies are already active in your region so that you can tell the story? Oh, you're just a company just like this one, and they have done great here. We have supported them. They have used this and this program from our community, and also then use them as champions and as spokespersons, because nothing tells a story that better than testimonials and being able to put somebody up front and center and saying, see these guys, you can talk to them and they can tell you exactly what it's like to run a business in our region. And then knowing how to approach and talk to these companies and knowing what they're all about, whether, and this is of course more in terms of business attraction, but even if you go and try to support some of your mid or larger size businesses in terms of their growth efforts, understanding their pain points, understanding what has recently happened to them, and how to talk to these kind of companies, that is really important to know as a starting point what you have to work with and how to tell your story and how to know that you can't be everything to everybody. That's a fact. Usually you spread yourself too thin. We certainly are supporting in all kinds of ways diversification that has proven more so than any other year important, both in terms of strategies, meaning going after new companies, growing your own companies, supporting your existing companies, going after different type of industries, making sure you have a good spread of the size of companies, those that are internationally exposed, those that are serving domestic markets. But again, even though you could have already existing business that might be very diverse, if you're talking about focusing resources, you want some diverse set, but you have to pick. I usually say 3 or 4 things is a good, 3 or 4 targets is a good way of focusing. Anything beyond that already starts sounding like you're trying to do it all. And it's hard. And if somebody sees your website and it's like, oh yeah, they're one of these people. Oh, we can do IT, we can do manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, all advanced manufacturing, and then you're already losing people because that's not your story. That's everybody's saying we have infrastructure, we have great internet, we have high skilled workers, we are close to a metro area, but so what? So who are you? And that's really what needs to stand out. Otherwise, people won't take initiatives seriously. And even local businesses, if they don't understand what you're trying to do, what your mission is, what your vision is, it will be hard for them to really buy into that as well.
Councillor Roy Clemente, I see you have a question.
Yes, thank you. I was just, I wanted to go back to perhaps a better understanding of Dr. Jesrich's methodology and in uncovering some of those hidden niches, given that that's something that, we sort of struggle with, given, what tools we have at hand to understand. We understand intrinsically that the agricultural segment is important to us, but those professional services that are, sort of 14% of that whole. How did we uncover that? How did we get to that? And how do we track if it shifts or not, given that we're seeing an increased amount of residential growth in our communities? How do we keep track of how that's shifting on us? And I guess it goes back to methodology. So I'd like to better understand that, please. And thank you.
Yes, of course. And that's something even before this year was already not easy for smaller communities. And I think even if you go, I think it's the first couple of pages, even to a second page or so in the report, you see already some caveat of how to interpret some of the government data. So what we used is really, it's a platform that uses all the government available data and just makes sure they're able to be consistent in terms of the classifications of occupations and industries. And that helps a lot. And it's trying to project some of them forward because unfortunately, especially in Canada, some of the government data is outdated. But everything, of course, is becoming even more difficult now. I mean, when people are trying to figure out how things have changed, job numbers, employment numbers from the government certainly help. I think more so than ever. So that's what we relied on. We looked at trends. And that's really, again, we were looking at medium and long-term targets. And so for us, it was not just about how it had changed from last year to this year or how it had changed this year, but really to see what the foundation is. And so that was the easier part, so to say, because we could rely on 5-year growth trends, and that gave us a good idea. But even there, we saw some inconsistencies in the government data between, what seemed to be businesses that show up in a certain industry, businesses that you have, and that fall in a certain industry, which cannot be classified really much in any other way. But they don't really show up in the government data in the right way. So to me, that always tells me, first of all, especially this year, your local intelligence is more important than any government data set. It's a good baseline, but you need to know what your businesses are doing. You need to keep track on how their employment is changing. And that really needs to be based on survey data. And that's really, unfortunately, the only way to go around it. Now, the good thing is that you're a small enough community that is doable. But I think that's the only way to really keep track of, and I know even the business license data is, that's always a tricky one, who really applies and who's actually a business and who's actually doing something. But I think it has to be a combination of that. So if you have a tool that can keep track, continuous surveys, quarterly surveys of your key businesses, you have a tool that can help you keep track of job postings. It's a little bit tricky to interpret, but again, at least it gives you some trend line if you are used to it and looking at it regularly to see what is going on and if there's any accelerations in certain sectors, even if it's lagged, and there's problems obviously in how these things are posted. But it has to be a lot of different data points that they have to come together in a way that, okay, they're all kind of telling the same story, so I can believe that story, versus just following one data point and saying, oh, there's 100% growth in this sector, so let's go with that number. It must be true. It's going to be, especially with now the government data, it's going to be wonky, to say the least, for the next year or two at least. I suspect across the world, it's not just a matter of North America or Canada. So you have to rely much more on your local intelligence going forward and be able to track it than your typical data sets or the Stats Canada data from now on.
Thank you. I guess for me, it's one of those things where, we feel like we're in tune with what's happening in our community. And then we come across somebody who's, part of that knowledge economy, who's working from, from a basement in rural East Gwillimbury, and they're a world-class expert in something that we had no idea about. And they're not engaged in our local business community because they don't need to be. But they're incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly skilled, and it's about finding those I guess the hidden niches that we may not know about because of that, right? They're not engaging with us on that level because they don't need to. But those are the people that we want to grow their business and have them set up a physical location and employ 3 or 4 more people and start to grow that economy. So I guess that's what I struggle with, is how do we tap into those gems that we know, sort of just because we happen to run into somebody at the soccer field and find out what they do, that how do we sort of formalize those relationships, I guess, is what I struggle with. Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Jesrich.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I see that Councillor Crone has a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to both Margot and Nadine. And I'm following up a bit on what Councillor Roy DiClemente was stating. I go back to the slide where you said, what is it? Approximately 80% of all new job growth comes from existing business. So what level of government do you think is best suited to leverage that? Is it the feds? Is it the province? Or is it the municipal? And if it's the municipal, what levers can we pull to help maximize that and capitalize on it? I'd welcome your thoughts.
If you want, I can tackle that first, and then Nadine, please feel free to jump in. I think it's short answer, it's all levels of government. Obviously, the municipal level, we're going to be the main point of contact. We're the first point of, being able to provide support and interventions, and I help them to identify needs. But I think that we can't do it all. So part of the business growth, business expansion focus is on connecting them to existing resources, because we know we have programs and supports at the regional level, we have them at the provincial level, and there are federal programs. And we've seen that sort of in a microcosm of the pandemic response, how helpful it's been to connect businesses to those various levels of support. So I think it's, it's really identifying, we're the ones that are going to be the direct interface with our local businesses, but making sure that they have the supports that they need. And if the supports that they need don't exist, then we need to get creative. Nadine, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess it's economists have different philosophies as well. I'm very much a bottom-up person, meaning that for me, the local community always comes first, because you're the only ones who know your business, even if they're hiding in the basement. Because I mean, for me, it's just, you are the ones who can provide the support, and you can lobby and stand for your companies, and then go to, and I think those have been the most successful initiatives, even at the provincial level, when local communities got together and rallied together around a certain pain point or a certain challenge and brought it up to the provincial level and found a solution. But it came from the local level, because they heard it from companies, or they heard it from their workforce, whether it's housing or whether it's about a certain industry. So I think it definitely has to start at the local level, and that's and again, that's because that way the community also sees you engaged, and I think there will come more out of the woodwork, so to say. And I think that's very much the economic gardening philosophy as well, where it's all about providing the infrastructure for them to connect, providing the information for them to connect, and once you have a certain critical mass, that's when you can really say, okay, now we have this sector, and we can maybe formalize more certain activities and policies around it. But it has to start kind of from the bottom, because otherwise too many people, too many companies drop off at the sides, because they won't be captured from something that's just coming from the top.
And if I may, just to follow up on the question about how do you find these sort of hidden professionals or this hidden talent. Pre-COVID, we had actually started working on an initiative. There are some great examples across the country of communities that have undertaken sort of hidden professional programs to try to bring them together. Unfortunately, as Nadine mentioned, usually the best way to sort of engage them is to provide them with opportunities to network and interact with each other, because that's typically the biggest barrier that these solo entrepreneurs are facing, is that they're not interacting with anyone else. So COVID has pretty much put a damper on that, but I mean, that just means that we need to be creative and innovative in terms of how we invite those people and uncover those skills and invite them to connect with each other and with resources.
Okay, thank you.
Were there any other questions? I just had one. Thank you, Dr. Jesrich. And it's regarding the number of businesses that we do have in town now that are larger ones that are national, and a couple of them are international. And the amount of time and effort that we could or should be putting into helping them expand as well. Could you just comment on that for me, please?
Yeah, I mean, some of these sectors obviously have been affected more than others. I think the larger employers, because of the spillover effect and multiplication effect through your local economy, they have to be on really a continuous networking cycle and interaction cycle to really be to have an open channel of communication with them at all times. You do not want to end up. I remember talking to a community that 1,000 jobs had to be cut last year, and they didn't see it coming. And the company had trouble for a while, and now they say, well, we really should have talked to them more often, and then they had to get some government funds to retrain their workforce, and it's fine now. I mean, they managed it, but they said, well, next time this is not going to happen again. We're really going to keep tabs on our key employers. And this doesn't have to be to the exclusion of other businesses. I mean, this just is one of it's just your communication framework with your businesses and your surveys. I think that they don't necessarily deserve more or less attention, but I think it's probably a more detailed conversation that you need to have with them about what their challenges are and what their outlook is and where they see themselves in the next year. And I think that's the forward-looking part of these conversations. Is probably more what's key for these larger companies to get a sense of what they see coming down the road and how you can help them and support them in what they see as their key challenges for the next 12 to 18 months. Since they have a much longer planning cycle than a lot of the mid and smaller sized businesses.
I look at them as being ambassadors for us with some of the other companies that perhaps are just coming to our door wondering whether East Gwillimbury is the right place to be or not. And so I thank you. I see some of them that perhaps particularly two that are international now that perhaps will want to grow, and we want to help them grow in East Gwillimbury.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those anchor companies are a great story, Katrina said, ambassadors for your community, for sure.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any other questions. Margot, is there any further information for us today?
Yes, there's actually quite a bit more. We'll go through the SWOT analysis, but are we okay to proceed, Madam Mayor, or we need a break, or keep going?
I think we're fine to proceed. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'll now thank you very much, Nadine. Really appreciate your input, and we'll now move into the SWOT analysis and the key themes that emerged from our conversations with yourselves as members of council and with the senior management team as well. So if I could go to the next slide, please. I don't want to read slides to everyone, but I do think it's important to highlight and summarize so that we all have an understanding. There were a lot of common themes that emerged, but also a lot of great information that came out of our recent discussions. And these are presented in no particular order. There's no weighting assigned to these. It's just sort of a summary of what was uncovered. So we recognize that the community is a desirable place to live. We've got competitively priced land, and that puts it as us at an advantage compared to some of our neighboring municipalities that are almost fully built out. We have a highly skilled and educated workforce. We've also got access to a large workforce that are all within an easy commute of this community. Our proximity, and it was we often think about our proximities to Toronto, but it was also identified that that we're also close to one of the largest film industries, and we know some of our neighbors benefit from some aspects of that sector, especially as locations, for example. So that was something that was brought out as a strength. Agriculture, as Nadine touched on, healthcare, as proximity to South Lake, transportation infrastructure. Next slide, please. Another slide, or another strength that a lot of people identified was our increasing diversity and the changing face of our community, and how that creates new opportunities and new energies. And that our growth as a community in terms of population is also creating expanding markets for local businesses. Our small size means that we can still be nimble, and that members of council are approachable. You can have conversations with the mayor about development projects. It's a level of responsiveness that I think helps us to distinguish ourselves from other communities. And I think the other strength that was identified, and I would support this, is that we've started to really devote resources to the economic development function, and are gaining momentum in the right direction. Next slide, please. We talked a little bit as well about some of the challenges or barriers that we face to growth, and the lack of shovel-ready or lack of availability of service lands certainly comes up. Broadband, and we'll get into that a little bit more fully later in this conversation. The corporate culture, still, there's been a lot of improvement, but we really need to be committed to a customer-centric, getting to yes kind of philosophy in order to be successful. We don't currently have any post-secondary or secondary education facilities to focus as a center of excellence. The lack of anchor employers to stimulate cluster development, we certainly have some, and they've been identified as part of the target industry analysis, but there's always an opportunity to attract more. Affordable housing, or the diversity of housing options, can be a challenge, especially from a workforce attraction perspective. And the available land, as Nadine mentioned, a significant portion is owned by companies that prefer to lease, and that doesn't necessarily line up with what we're seeing in terms of what the market is demanding right now. Next slide, please. In terms of other challenges or barriers that were identified, frequent turnover of local businesses in some of our downtown areas. The cost of expansion can be challenging, and we know that we only control a portion of those costs, that the regional fee structure has an impact on local businesses' abilities to grow and to expand their footprint. There's been a lot of rapid change in the last few years, and that with change sometimes comes some resistance to change and to growth. There are challenges related to current spending patterns. We've identified a tendency to shop elsewhere or go out of the community for goods and services, and then just, I guess, the lack of energy or putting in terms of getting the ball rolling in economic development, in terms of being perhaps more reactive and less proactive than we'd like to be. Next slide, please. Now we get to the opportunities, and there are a lot of them, which is the exciting part. I think we have an opportunity, and this has been echoed by a number of folks that we spoke with, to attract people and skills because they want the lifestyle and the amenities that East Gwillimbury has to offer and will continue to offer even when fully built out. We have an opportunity to ensure that the visual look and feel of what we build and what we attract is in keeping with the vision that we have for our community. We could look at key infrastructure investments that help to sort of bridge gaps where we don't have sufficient broadband coverage, for example. We talked about the opportunity to be really proactive and look at some strategic land purchases and servicing models that would be a kickstart for development. And there was even discussion that although debt is not the favored position, that it's not off the table in terms of if the business case was strong enough and we understood that there was going to be a long-term benefit to the community, that it could be part of the conversation. And there's an opportunity to, aside from the 404 and as a corridor, that Highway 48 itself presents opportunities in terms of being able to pull people that are traveling north to cottage country, for example, and to spend money locally. Next slide, please. I mentioned this in our strengths in terms of, so as an opportunity, how do we leverage that changing ethnic and cultural diversity? One of the tactics we might explore, for example, to capitalize on this opportunity would be a commercial gap analysis. What are the services and businesses that our changing demographic requires and wants to have access to locally? We have an opportunity to continue to build on the importance and the value of shopping locally. I think we can be really bold in supporting our existing businesses to expand and create jobs. The opportunity was identified to continue to have conversations like this one to ensure that council has a solid understanding of our economic development aims and objectives. We talked about transit options for seniors and other vulnerable populations as a potential opportunity. Next slide, please. I think we can more effectively engage with the community to to help them understand our growth objectives and help them prepare for the changes that come with growth, and to have the community be part of the conversation that shapes what the community looks like as we grow. And that sort of dovetails into the next point that came out of the SWOT discussions, which were to be able to address these anti-growth type sentiments, and by making sure that people understand the benefits of the kind of sustainable growth that we're seeking and the kind of intentional growth that we're looking to achieve. Especially now during the pandemic, there are opportunities to think about leveraging how many people are now working remotely. Across the region, it's about 60% of the workforce commutes out of the York region to work. They're now, as a result of the pandemic, for the most part, that commuter pattern has been reduced, if not almost eliminated. So what opportunities does that present in terms of the economic gardening tactic, for example? We have an opportunity to position ourselves more clearly as a green community, and Nadine touched on this in terms of, if we want to attract elements of the clean technology sector, for example, then the best way to do that is to embody and live those values. So adopting green technologies helps to attract like-minded businesses. We have an opportunity to become more involved in business incubation and acceleration. Look at the model that Innisfil has adopted and has ties to post-secondary as well as the business skill development side of things. And our fourth slide, please, for opportunities. The other opportunities that came up was, in terms of being strategic, that we want to make sure that we maintain large parcels of land, that we're not simply selling to carving off smaller pieces, because we know that it's the large anchor companies that we want to attract require larger spaces, larger pieces of land. We still have opportunities to attract and to grow and nurture post-secondary education opportunities, ideally tied to some of our anchor companies or target sectors. So, medical focus, because we know, for example, the South Lake Hospital has announced that they are looking to expand. If that would be potentially a great fit for East Gwillimbury. So what does that mean in terms of spin-off opportunities to leverage in terms of their supply chain and educational opportunities related to the healthcare sector, for example? We talked a lot about the value proposition, so I won't go into that, but just our opportunity to more effectively tell our story, green economy lens, and we have an opportunity to think about district energy when we have sufficient user density, and so that's where this kind of, as I mentioned at the outset, kind of impacts other departments, other sectors, but if we're all rowing in the same direction, that these are some of the objectives that we might want to think about. Next slide, please. And finally, just some of the overarching sort of threats or conditions that we need to be aware of as we're moving forward. We need to make sure that we're paying attention to whether or not there is a mismatch between the actual skills that we have and what our workforce is demanding. And if there is a mismatch, then what are the actions we can take with our other stakeholders or our education partners to bridge some of those skill gaps. We talked a lot about the servicing limitations, the fact that there, the things we can't control, regional, provincial legislation, and also how, general economy and what those impacts are. So the stronger we are, the more resilient we are, the less we are impacted or influenced by those other outside controls. There's a concern as we grow that that there's a risk of losing individual community identities. Mount Albert wants to remain distinctly Mount Albert. Sharon, Holland, all want to retain distinct identities, and so we need to be conscious of that as we grow and look for ways to be able to support and foster that, because that feeds into sort of the uniqueness and the lifestyle that attracts people to our community. If we had staff who weren't particularly invested in supporting growth, and I think we have staff that are in fact very invested in supporting sustainable growth and excellent customer service. We have work to do, but certainly that's something we have to keep an eye on, because that could be a factor that influences our success. Water supply, geographic location, the lack of high-level transit options, and the fact that we don't yet have that 400-404 link are all influences or factors that we need to consider, but certainly don't stop us from moving forward. Next slide, please. So from all of those discussions and all of those sort of ideas that were generated, I think we've got some sort of emerging big ideas that are going to shape our strategy going forward. I think we have an opportunity to be proactive in kickstarting development when we identify something that is going to be a strong fit and meet our growth objectives. And we can do that through strategic land acquisition or servicing. We can do that through remediation of derelict properties that would be fixed up and then sold to attract new investment and perhaps act as sort of a gateway to further development in that particular area of the community. We could look at tactics like shared cost programs that encourage facade improvements. Obviously, none of this comes without investment and resources, but these are the kinds of things that we're starting to talk about now, and it's pretty exciting. We can also look at strategic investments that bridge the broadband gaps, and we'll dive into that a little bit more on a subsequent slide. And we can also, again, do a much better job of telling our story and engaging ambassadors, as Madam Mayor mentioned, to help to tell the EG story. We're certainly undergoing a significant modernization of our existing Advantage EG website. That'll be part of it, but I think there's lots of work to do there. Next slide, please. Some of the other big ideas that have sort of come out of, have been sort of able to synthesize from our discussions is that we can attract new businesses that meet the needs of our changing community. We can engage the community more effectively in our conversations about growth and what that can and should look like. And we can identify opportunities to leverage the changes in the commuter outflows that have happened post-COVID. More people working from home, more people comfortable with working remotely. What can that mean in terms of our opportunities? Next slide, please. So, we're now sort of the last section. We talk about kind of the, what are those, the linchpins or the key enablers of a development that kind of make or break our ability to be successful. Availability of service lands, our customer service excellence, and broadband access. You go to the next slide, please. My apologies to GIS technicians and cartographers everywhere. I really just wanted to be able to have a visual representation of when we talk about land. We look at the sort of the 404 employment lands. You see a lot of green areas that are, while some of it is available for development, not all of it, because there are environmental constraints. And then the lower, there's the yellow covers up some of the properties that we talked about that are available for lease only. So it does impact the availability of what we have to develop and sell. And overwhelmingly, the market is looking for available industrial land because it just doesn't exist, or if it does, it's not affordable. So certainly, our land availability is impacted by existing development that's already there, environmental constraints, and then that land is available for lease only. So we either, I think it's an and. We have the ability to try to be creative about targeting companies that are more amenable to a lease type arrangement, as Nadine talked about, or what can we do to be targeted in attracting the companies that we know are going to stimulate growth, and what might we do in terms of strategic land acquisition, for example, to get that going. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the availability of service lands, and why are we talking about it? Because we know that there is a demand, and that's what new investment is looking for. We know that we're not, as Mark mentioned earlier, we're not starting from the beginning. We've done a lot of work in terms of the work that has been undertaken as part of the 404 employment land secondary plan, for example. As concurrent to that, CIS has identified sort of a phased approach to servicing and identified the costs of servicing those employment lands. So we have good data now on what that could look like. And we're at the point right now where we're sort of in a holding pattern while we're waiting for that critical mass of development interest in order to be able to move forward. So what could we do about that? Well, we can look at public-private partnerships, and we can consider some strategic municipal investments. So shifting from sort of a reactive stance to a more proactive, looking at specific, investments that we think will get the ball rolling, and continue to work on advocacy to affect or impact some of those external factors.
Margot.
Certainly, yes.
And I have a question. Are we down the road looking to create some sort of a great video that we can put on YouTube? Why people should invest in East Gwillimbury, and pictures 1,000 words. When many years ago we did one for the Chamber of Commerce, we focused on the region, we focused on the hospital, we focused all the amenities that makes this great town of ours great. I was wondering if we had maybe you're already working on some capture of a very short video showing us selling ourselves, and put it on YouTube or put it anywhere on Facebook, put it everywhere, why people should invest in, and maybe create this is now, and this is where we're going to look for the future. This is a vision of what we're going to look like. If you get in early enough now, you'll be able to we could save a spot for you, but if you wait later on, you might have to line up in the end of the line. So create some sort of like capture the whole, the focus of people, why they should move in this area, invest in this area, and work in this area, and play in this area. I mean, like, I'm thinking of the movies. I'm thinking of very creative stuff that I wish I should have been a writer, but I'm not that good. Anyway, I see the visions of what it could look like. Anyway, just something that maybe you can answer me that question.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Mayor, just to respond to that, I think that the visual, and some sort of visual representation can be extremely effective for our internal audience in terms of envisioning what the growth is going to look like and who we're going to be. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but to expand on something that Nadine said earlier, when we're actually having conversations with specific investors or prospective investors, the generalized messaging tends to get lost. They want to know specifically do the numbers work? How much is it going to cost? Is somebody going to help me? Is the town going to be behind me? Are other people that are there happy? And will I have access to the workforce that I need? So I do think we can be a lot more proactive about how we sell and how we celebrate what we have to offer. But it's I think that the caveat is that there are different levels of that conversation. There's that high level conversation that kind of piques somebody's interest, but then we got to be prepared to have the good data and the specific numbers to speak to, and the customer service to back it up when it comes down to the actual deals that are being made. So I think it's a combination, and but I do think that that idea of being able to help people visualize what we're in, and we already have some of that work done, but pulling it together and being able to share it with the community could be a really powerful tool.
Councillor Carruthers, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, and thank you, Margot. This has been a fantastic presentation. I love the SWOT analysis that kind of tells us where the sticking points are and the solutions that you're presenting. I'm just having a little bit of trouble understanding about when we have the barrier that land that's available is only available for lease, but the solution is that maybe we could purchase it. I'm not really sure how that works. If they don't want to sell to businesses, why would they sell to us?
Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor. Sorry, I may have confused that, and it wasn't a one-for-one exchange. So we have parcels of land that are available for lease, and that model's not going to change. So we try to find businesses that are amenable to a lease type of situation. But then beyond that, with some of our other existing land that isn't yet serviced and may not be, not all of our land, some development has come forward and proposed self-servicing solutions, but that's not going to be approved in all areas. The region has sort of an overarching view of the progression of servicing. So we're kind of stuck. So it's really a conversation about, are we leading the servicing of existing lands, or are we waiting for the development community, or is it somewhere in the middle? So it's more a strategic purchase might be appropriate in the example. For example, if we take the South Lake example, and we know that they're looking for somewhere to expand, and we think we've got a really great business case for them to locate in EG. And I'm not saying this has to be the tactic, but it's part of the conversation. Do we strengthen our case by being able to identify a piece of property and prep it specifically to their needs in order to position ourselves as the ideal location? That's a kind of strategy that I was kind of referring to.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. And I also like the idea of acquiring derelict properties, because I think that really does, as you said, it impacts all the businesses around. Nobody wants to be in that location when there's a derelict business there. So anyways, I think this is fantastic. Lots of great ideas, lots of options. You're giving us lots to think about. So thank you.
Yeah, for no further questions, maybe go on to the next slide, please. So now we talk about service excellence, or business, the embodiment of what we hope is business advantage, because I think, again, our small size, the absence of a distinct competitive advantage, our ability to differentiate ourselves and to stand out is on our ability to provide excellence in customer service. I don't know how many times I've had conversations with CEOs and C-suite executives where the difference has been made by relationship and responsiveness, because we have wonderful things to offer, but so do many other communities around across the country and across North America, and essentially that's who we're competing against. So how do we make a difference? Well, we make a difference through clarity of process, through being business friendly and being invested in the success of our businesses. And I would say where we are today is that we've got, as I mentioned, we've got a sort of a renewed and rejuvenated focus on economic development. We've identified business advantage as an economic development priority. We've made a significant progress in refining some of our internal processes that support growth, but we also have some challenges in that I don't think that business advantage necessarily has been, that sort of a cultural shift has been manifested across the organization yet. We're moving in that direction, but we've still got some work to do in terms of ensuring that all of our communication is customer centric, and all of our programs and the way that we respond are based on being really invested in the success of our customers, who are our residents and who are our business community and who are prospective investors. So in the terms of the next steps of how do we get to where I believe we need to go, I think we have some work to do in terms of building the understanding across the organization of why success and business success and job growth are important. And that back to that tree diagram, I've lived in the economic development world for 20 plus years. Obviously not everybody has been immersed in that. So I think it's helpful to kind of understand, like, why should we care? Why does it matter if our businesses succeed? And helping people to understand that, I believe, helps them be more invested in that success. I think we still have room to refine and enhance some of our processes and the speed with which we are able to respond. We're working on some ideas to sort of support a more customer-centric communication across the organization, and make sure that we're administering our fees and charges in a way that supports both our priorities and our need to recover costs, but also supports business success. So in order to get there, I kind of offer these as ideas for discussion and consideration. I think business advantage needs not to be an economic development priority. It needs to be municipal priority that's reflected across all programs, policies, and communications at all levels. So when somebody comes in to discuss a planning application, or when they're bringing in an application before council, like it's that idea that we're embracing and invested in the success and growth of our businesses. Obviously, there are going to be resource allocation implications associated with that. Doesn't necessarily, not everything costs money. Sometimes it just costs time and effort. And then I think, you know, this next point is sort of critical to how we move forward. I mean, are we the gatekeepers in terms of you know, regulating and managing processes in a way that is focused on, you know, what are the rules, what are the municipal needs, that kind of thing, or are we working with our applicants and our, you know, in our business community as if our livelihoods depend on their success? And I kind of take that from my private sector experience, where, you know, if your customer's unhappy and you don't make the sale, you don't make an income. And you know, if you go back again to that tree diagram, it's the investment of businesses and it's the ability, their contribution to the tax base, along with obviously that of our residents, that allows us to do what we need to do. It funds our ability to offer programs and services and amenities, and it funds our positions. So that's more just of a change in terms of how we, you know, our approach and how we frame our interactions with our customers. And I think that the other kind of the big sort of piece of this is that clarity of process is a huge factor in the decision location decision of businesses, whether they choose to expand or whether they choose to come, you know, a new business coming in to invest. And that's not, you know, obviously businesses are, you know, will ask about incentives, but if their business model is reliant on incentives, it's probably not going to be successful necessarily. You know, it has to be a much stronger business case than just that. But they will want to know what to expect. They want to know how long things are going to take, how much it's going to cost, what are the various steps that they're going to need to go through. And I think we can do a better job of communicating that. And efforts are underway to enhance that, but it's something that we do need to work on. So do we have any questions on that sort of, on the business advantage or that kind of a customer-centric culture before we go on? And then I'll go on to the next slide then.
I do actually. It's Councillor RD. As far as the service excellence and business advantage, what can we as members of council do to support that? Because we're, you know, I love to meet with prospective businesses and chat with them about their hopes and dreams and how our community would match with their expectations. How can we support staff's efforts in that?
Well, I'd welcome input from other members of the staff but I mean, my sense is that just what you've said in terms of you love to hear about it and you appreciate just, you know, expressing that. I've noticed a huge difference just over the last number of months. You know, when I correspond with someone who is either looking to expand or is in the process, I'm always conscious of trying to acknowledge that we're excited to have you here. We value your investment. We're, you know, and I think that just making that part of our ongoing conversation and being excited about the contribution and recognizing that they're taking the risks, they're creating the jobs, and none of this that we can't do that as a municipality. So we rely on business and investment to do that. And so I believe that they're, you know, if nothing else, there is significant value in just acknowledging and appreciating that. So, you know, that's a real simple thing, but it can make a big difference. Okay. If there aren't any other comments or questions, I'll maybe go on to broadband. So broadband, again, is you know, another one of these sort of key enablers. It's one of our, you know, it's foundational to our ability to move forward, and you know, it's beyond the impact on our economic and our business growth, it obviously impacts the ability of our residents to participate in community life and to participate in the economy. And increasingly, especially during COVID, it impacts their ability to access education and healthcare and security and all of those kinds of things. So we know that we're currently without a significant portion of EG is without an acceptable level of service. We've recognized it as a priority, but as of yet, it's still separate and apart from what would be considered a municipal responsibility. And we have, that's not to suggest that we aren't working on it. The broadband working group was formed to focus specifically on trying to advance efforts to expand broadband connectivity, but we're still somewhat removed from actually sort of diving in and taking strategic steps that would advance or broadband coverage, or perhaps bridge some of those gaps that aren't being met by the market, where broadband is completely driven by private market forces at this point. So there's perhaps, and this came up a lot during our discussions, an opportunity to be a little bit more proactive in terms of addressing some of the gaps. So some of the things that were discussed, and I offer this really as just a starting point for our conversation today, embedding broadband access as a function of our municipal service delivery. And, that can look a lot of different ways, but it's just the difference between it, we're sort of acknowledging it and working on the issue from arm's length, if you will, to actually making it, part of our, a goal that we want to achieve a certain standard by the year 2030 or what have you. We have an opportunity to take a more active role in addressing some of the servicing gaps. And what was suggested were things like, if the difference can be made by erecting a tower to enhance wireless coverage, that the municipality might look at investing in that infrastructure and then leasing access to the private service providers. If the barrier is that a tower needs to go up but there's no place to put it, then maybe that's a strategic land purchase to be able to support that infrastructure being in place. So those are the kinds of things that came out of our conversations. And then, if there is an investment, how do we make that, how do we approach that in a way that's fair? Some residents are well served already and have fiber to the home and, have great service. So looking at sort of targeted interventions where there might be a cost sharing arrangement with the impacted residents or businesses, and that the project would focus on trying to arrive at some sort of equitable means of cost sharing any investments that go into that. Madam Mayor, yes. Sorry, I just see we have a question.
Yes, Councillor Crone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think on this topic, and it's so critical. We know broadband is so critical, not only for our economic development, but also just for quality of life for our residents. The one thing that I think we can do right now, and we've had conversations about this in the past, is let's get an inventory of land that the town owns, map it. So maybe it's a future site for someone to lease space for a tower. But also we have towers. We have telecommunications towers right now, and are they suited to lease space on those towers to independent internet service providers? So, I'm sure we can name a few of them just off the top of our head that might want to take advantage of it, provided it's close to existing fiber, because you need the tower near a fiber line. But I think that would be something we could do fairly easily that might fill in some of the gaps. And maybe that's part of the gap analysis that we do as part of the broadband working group. I'll leave that to you, but I think there's some quick wins that we could do here if we just had a better inventory of what we had, and through the prism of broadband. That's my comment.
Councillor Crothers.
Thank you. I think broadband really goes beyond economic development. It's an equity issue. It's now becoming a healthcare issue, as we're seeing cases of COVID rise. Some parents have the luxury of deciding whether to keep their kids at home from school, and other parents do not, and are forced to put their kids at an increased risk by sending them to school because they don't have adequate access to the internet at home. So this issue is so much more than broadband, and although it's not a municipal responsibility, I think the well-being of our residents is, and I think we really need to step up and be doing something quicker. What Councillor Crone talked about, a few quick wins. It makes a huge difference to people, and when I heard you say 2030, I shuddered. We can't wait that long. We need to be on this yesterday, and we need to be seeing what we can do so that all of our residents have the option of making decisions about their children's health and their own health if they have to go into work. If people have the option of working from home, then we need to do everything we can to keep them safe and give them the ability to work from home. Thank you.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Mayor, I think there's an opportunity, and it's probably part of a larger discussion, but to really, I guess, define the extent to which the municipality is going to engage in we can continue, as we have been with the support of the broadband working group, but if it becomes, as you suggest, an organizational priority, then I think our response looks different. And obviously, if that's the case, there are going to be resource implications and budgetary implications, and that's a conversation we need to have. But what I'm encouraged by is that there's an openness, I guess, to have that conversation, and we know that, while that conversation is happening, we can proceed with the gap analysis and also the asset identification, like where we have potential assets that we can leverage, and that can continue to move forward. I also just wanted to highlight that, I'm sure you've all experienced this when you get inquiries from residents, that there is a lack of clarity sometimes in terms of what our role is in advancing broadband coverage. I think some residents don't understand that it's completely managed by private market forces, and that distinction may or may not be relevant depending on what we decide to do about it. But I do think that this is another opportunity where there is an opportunity to kind of communicate that more effectively in terms of what we can do and what we plan to do versus what is outside of municipal control. And finally, the next slide, please. So the following slide is sort of my last one, and this is the one that I'm kind of excited about. If you recall, when we, at the beginning of the workshop this morning, we looked at the sort of strategic priorities that were identified for the 2011 strategy. And what I've tried to do is sort of synthesize the feedback and the energy that that I took from our conversations over the last week, and revisited some of that with hopefully a much more proactive perspective. Next slide, please. So we know that there's a clear consensus among members of council to be more proactive and more aggressive in pursuing economic growth priorities. There's a willingness to consider strategic investments. There's a recognition that progress will require taking measured but appropriate risks. And we know that overall, that in order to manage growth effectively and manage change, that we also need to preserve and celebrate the elements of our community that make EG unique. And I think sort of woven throughout this discussion, there is a desire to be bold and to be much more proactive. Next slide, please. So this is I took a stab at sort of updating what came out of the original strategy. So we're moving from sort of this passive language to more active action verbs, where we're not just going to foster, we're going to get in there and help. We're going to help the businesses to grow. We're going to lead the collaborative regional efforts, and you know, I'm happy to report that there's been a rejuvenation of the N6 Economic Development Working Group, as well as we have much more regular working relationship with our partners across the region as a whole. And that it's not just supporting, but we're going to get out in front and drive job creation through strategic investment and expansion of our existing businesses, because we've got an understanding of what our strengths are, what our opportunities are, and we now have a much stronger story to be able to tell, to be able to drive that growth. So I thank you all very much for your time and attention this morning, and I'm happy to field any questions you may have, or love to hear any comments you wish to share.
Councillor Crone, you had a question?
Yeah, just more of a comment, but wanted to thank Margot Bejan and our guest Nadine for presenting today. I think this has been incredibly educational. But I would go back to I think it was slide 30, where you made the point that to enhance the foundational understanding of economic development among council. And I think we could all benefit from even more education on this.
Sure.
This is not a one and done type subject. It's, you know, I know from when I've started on council and working with the Economic Development Committee, my understanding has grown exponentially, and I think everyone else would benefit from that. I'm still learning as we go, obviously. So I would strongly recommend to the rest of council that we do more sessions like this, and do you know, ECDev 101, 102, and let's do the full course load if we can, recognizing that there's other subjects that we need to bone up on as well. But would appreciate if we could do some more education on this. I think it would be great. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Crothers?
Thank you. Great work so far, but what are our next steps? What happens next? How do we get some of these balls rolling?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. There are a number of next steps. Formalizing some of the findings and the strategic objectives into strategic priorities that would be embodied in our updated economic development strategy. Then my job as the practitioner would be to recommend specific tactics to support those objectives. I think probably there's an opportunity to have some more discussion and conversation about, you know, on those specific key enablers, and perhaps, and I welcome your guidance in this, but it may be, you could have sort of broad conversation, or I could bring forward a potential project, just sort of as like in a pilot to consider, as, you know, here's an option we might consider if we were going to do, you know, if we wanted to consider a strategic investment, and that might be a little easier starting point for conversation. But I do think it's, I mean, you know, we're not starting from nothing. We've a lot of this work has been started. I think it's what now there's an opportunity to kind of capture this energy and momentum and put it into some concrete action steps.
And I think that's what I'm looking for. The broad conversations today have been fantastic, and the conversations we had individually with you, again, very, very good. But I'm anxious now to get some actions happening and making sure that we're moving forward as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Mr. Webster, you had a comment or question?
I did, Madam Mayor. Again, I'd like to thank Margot and her team. Excellent workshop today. As far as some of the items, we have an annual growth management workshop that we generally do in the first quarter of every year. And I think council looks forward to that. It's a way of keeping the pulse of what's happening by both a residential and non-residential growth perspective. And we will be planning one for early 2021. If council has an appetite to have a more regular update, I think at least an annual economic development strategy should be a consideration. We are undertaking a full review of our growth plans to 2051. And I think that economic development, a master plan or a strategic master plan should be part of that exercise as well. We're going to have water, sewer, transportation, active transportation trail. And we've talked to Margot about the need to have our economic development strategy updated as one of the key plans as well. The broadband plan probably would be an adjunct to it, the majority of those as well. Parks, recreation, and culture is another key master plan that we're updating. With respect to immediate next steps, I'll point to next Tuesday. We have our business plan and budget kickoff for the 2021 budget. And part of that process is each of our areas, including economic development, will be bringing forward their priority work initiatives for council's consideration and approval. And if there's going to be tangible next steps, I would ask Margot to look towards that process as well. It's where council approves. It approves a resource envelope. It approves priorities for that year, and it certainly helps move a 2031 discussion into 2021 pretty quickly. So I think there's a couple of things we can do, and I just wanted again to close off on thanking Margot for an excellent session.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other questions. Councillor Roy DiClemente.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Not to want to have the last word, because I think Mr. Webster did sum things up nicely for us, but for me, wanting to make sure that the budget process does give the resources that Margot needs to proceed further with this, and also I think the two things that we hope to see some concrete progress on are the land issue and the broadband issue. And I think, Councillor, I wanted to echo some support for Councillor Crone's suggestion that in addition to identifying that map of where the gaps are, but also identifying some land that we can leverage that we already own to put towers up. I want to express some support for that. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about the land mismatch issue. And perhaps, I know in the past, Development Services has produced binders that sort of gave us as council members an idea of what the holdings were, who held them, and that sort of thing. But perhaps an additional layer could be put in to identify those lands that are held by people who prefer to lease, or for those who would be open to a strategic partnership or to a sale to the right partner to build on those lands. So I think identifying those, I think, are two really concrete things that we can start that would inform the process further. Just my thoughts, and thank you again for this morning. This was great.
Thank you very much. Anybody else with comments or questions? Thank you, Dr. Jesrich. Really appreciate you being here today with us. It's opened our eyes wider than they have been in quite some time. I'm still on one of the very first questions that was asked, Margot, and that was, is our vision still relevant? And I think that there will be a lot of discussion about that as well. I see so many opportunities in front of us. And it's just a matter of putting the right people in the right places at the right time. So thank you very much. I know that everybody now on council and staff as well, as people talk about their company maybe moving somewhere else, we'll all be much more aware of where they should be moving to, and to work with them to make sure that our residents aren't driving somewhere outside of the community, that they can stay here and contribute socially as well, rather than being in a vehicle. So thank you very much appreciated. Looking forward to our budget discussions. That is where we will now be able to take our priorities from today and see how it fits with our budget for the year. So with that, I would ask if Councillor Crone and Councillor Foster would move the information, be it resolved that the target industry snapshot prepared by research on investment be received and that the Advantage EG update presentation be received. All those in favor? And that's carried. I'm wondering if we have a confirmatory bylaw, Councillor Roy Clemente, and I know Councillor Morton is on the line. We haven't heard from her, but she's been listening.
I have been.
I knew you were there. Be it resolved that the bylaw 2020-08 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the special meeting of Municipal Council held on October 14th, 2020 be taken as read, enacted and signed by the Mayor and Municipal Clerk. All those in favor? Thank you very much. And I wonder, Councillor Persicini and Councillor Carruthers, if you could move our adjournment, and it will be at 12:10. Be it resolved that special council meeting of Municipal Council adjourn at 12:10. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you so much for all the information to everyone. I know there were a lot of partners behind you as well, and we do appreciate that and understand that you're working as a team. Thank you very much. Our meeting is now adjourned.